Good morning. Today is Tuesday. Hey Kislev, Tafshin Ayin Tes. We are in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tafshin Yud Gimel, in the Mamar of Shabbos Parshas Shlach Tafshin Yud Gimel. Dibra Maschil Vayihiyu Bnei Yisroel Bamidbar. We are on page Kuf Ayin Ches, 2 lines from the bottom. V'chein, the third v'chein on the page. The Rebbe is addressing Avodas Hashem, serving Hashem, b'medida v'hagbala, with a measure and a limit, a limited way of serving Hashem, and Avodas Hashem shelamayla medida v'hagbala, serving Hashem beyond measure and limit. The Rebbe explained how we have these two scenarios in actual Avodas Hashem, in the Maisa, in the application of Avodas Hashem, actually carrying out Avodas Hashem, in the 3 areas of Gemilas Chasadim, Avodah and Torah, acts of loving kindness, davening, and Torah, the study of Torah. He then went on to explain how this is in relation to the emotional aspects of the person, in terms of the person's natural love and fear of Hashem, Ahava v'yira tiviyim. In the next section, he explained this as it relates to the intellect of the person, the hisbonenus, the contemplations, the intellectual contemplations that bring the person to love and fear Hashem. And in each of these areas, the Rebbe explained that if it's performed or engaged in a limited way, we could run into trouble. We could run into problems in terms of the different aspects being perhaps possibly directed towards the opposite of Kedusha. And it's only when it's performed or engaged in with the unlimited aspect that we are safe in terms of assuring that the efforts and the emotions and the intellect are directed in the area of Kedusha and not in the area of the opposite of Kedusha, in the Umazah, the opposite of holiness. Now the Rebbe goes on to explain the same in connection to serving Hashem with what is known as Re'usa de Liba. Few words of introduction. The definition of Re'usa de Liba is Aramaic. Re'usa means desire. We say in Berich Shmei, when we open up the Aron Kodesh, the ark to take out the Torah, at the very end, we say Yehei Rav Kadomach, right? Which means, may it be the will before you. We daven to Hashem and we ask Hashem that His will may be, etc., etc. Rava, Ru'usa, is the Aramaic interpretation, definition of Rotzen. Desire, will, desire. Liba is Aramaic for lev, the heart. Ru'usa, the Liba means the desire of the heart. So we're talking about a level of Ahavas Hashem, a level of love for Hashem, known as Re'usa de Liba. That's the level of love that Hashem, that the Rebbe addresses in the next section. The love to Hashem that the Rebbe addresses in the next section. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole exposition of this love known as Re'usa de Liba, because the whole concept of loving Hashem, Ahavas Hashem, is vast in Chassidus. There's a sefer called Sefer HaErchim Chabad, which is an encyclopedia of Chabad Chassidism. So Ahavas Hashem has tens and tens and tens and tens of pages, divided into different sections. And it's a vast sugya, it's a vast subject. But just a few general pointers so that we don't get confused, particularly when studying other parts of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe, let's start from the Alter Rebbe from Tanya. The Alter Rebbe addresses or mentions Re'usa Deliba, I believe, in 3 chapters in the first part of the Tanya. One is in chapter 17, the other is in chapter 39, and the third is in chapter 44. I'll just point out that there is a letter from the Rebbe which was originally published in Kovetz Lubavitch, which was something that was published, I think, until 1969 or 1970. The letter is also published in the Rebbe's Letters, Volume 1, page Shin Yud Ches, 318. It starts earlier, but it's a long letter, but this particular section starts on page 318, Shin Yud Ches. It's dated Vov Menachem of Heitov Shin Daled. So it's from 1944. It means it's a letter from the Rebbe before he took on the leadership of Chabad. And someone points out to him that in chapter 39, the Alter Rebbe discusses a certain level of Ahavas Hashem, love of Hashem, and he says, Ahavazu nikra Re'usa Deliba. This love is called Re'usa Deliba. Kanal. Kanal is an acronym. It stands for Kenisker Le'il, as mentioned above, but it could also perhaps be meaning Kenisker Le'kaman, as mentioned ahead. What's above, before chapter 39, is chapter 17, and following chapter 39 is chapter 44. So the person asks the Rebbe, what's the Alter Rebbe referring to? Kanal. Does he mean the chapter preceding it, or does he mean further on? So the Rebbe says, first of all, in most places, he thinks in all places of Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe says Kanal, it's always referring to, as mentioned above, Kenisker Le'il, because when the Alter Rebbe is referring to anything that's further on, he wouldn't use the expression Kanal, he would write Likamon. He would write, as will be explained ahead, later on. But then the Rebbe goes into a whole discussion of the different levels of Re'usa Deliba. I'm not going to go into that all now, it's a long letter, and you need to refer to the various sources, and as mentioned in Sefer Erchim, it's a vast subject, even though the heading under Re'usa Deliba in Sefer Erchim is not so long, but you have to learn the previous sections in order to get a whole picture. Just pointing out that for further reading, if anybody wants to study this a little bit more in depth, certainly very worthwhile to look at the Rebbe's letter that I just mentioned, and if you want to delve even more, to look into the Sefer Erchim in the various relevant sections. So, in general terms, I'll just say this. Re'usa Deliba, in most places in Chassidus, just point this out, that the Rebbe says, that in most places of Chassidus, Beroiv HaMachriya Shel Drushay Dach, in most places in Chassidus, the overwhelming majority of places in Chassidus, Mevur, it is explained, the Re'usa Deliba hu b'pnimiyas halev, that the level of Re'usa Deliba that is referred to is referring to the pnimiyas halev, the internal aspects of the heart. In other words, we're talking about a very high level of love. In Perek Zayin and Tanya, it seems that he's talking about Chitzonis Halev, a very much lower level of Ahavas Hashem. So just to point out again, that Re'usa Deliba is addressed differently in different parts of Chassidus. When we focus on our Maimer, as the Rebbe is going to now address Re'usa Deliba, we're talking about Re'usa Deliba at a higher level. Okay? He's going to address it from what I can, even though he doesn't mention it specifically, but it looks like he's speaking about the levels of the neshama of Chaya Yechida, the transcendent aspects of the soul. So again, I just wanted to mention that if we study other parts of Chassidus where it's explained differently, it is because Re'usa Deliba is indeed addressed at different levels and from different aspects in various parts of Chassidus. Here, the Rebbe is addressing it at a very much higher level, because as you could see, the Maimer, the way it's constructed, he's talking about limited and unlimited service of Hashem. He goes from Minakal El HaKaved, from from the lower level to the higher levels. He starts with Maisa, Gemilas Chasodim, Aveda and Torah. He goes to Ahav Avir Tivim, natural love and fear of Hashem. Then he goes into the Hidbonanut, intellectual aspects of contemplations that bring to Ahav Avir Sichliim, intellectual love and fear of Hashem. And then he moves on to a higher level, Ru'usa Deliba. So it's clear that he's talking about Ru'usa Deliba at a higher level, as is the case in most places in Chassidus. Another point, when we talk about Makifim, transcendent levels, there is a Makif, Hashayach el Apnimi. There is an aspect of the Makif, the transcendent, that even though it's beyond and transcends the Pnimi, the internal, the immanent, divine energy, yet it has a Shaykhas, it has an association to that energy. Then there's a Makif, a transcendent level, which is completely beyond having any association to the Pnimi. For example, when we talk about Keser, the level of Keser, the level of the crown, which is beyond the 10 divine attributes, beyond, and is transcendent, higher than the 10 Sfirot, right? There is Chitzenis HaKeser and Pnimis HaKeser. There's the external aspect of the crown Keser, and there's the internal aspect of Keser. Why? Because Keser is referred to as a Memutza, an intermediary between the Ein Sof, Hashem's infinity, and the Eiris Pnimium, the internal and immanent divine energies. Any intermediary has to have aspects from the one higher and an aspect from the one lower. Right? So the Pnimi aspect, the higher aspect of the intermediary, is related to the one that precedes it, to that which precedes it. So it's completely removed from the Eir Pnimi that follows after that. Whereas the external aspect of that Memutza, that intermediary, is already related in some way to that which follows afterwards. And being that it's combined, the Pnimi and the Chitzeni are combined as one level, it becomes the Memutza, the intermediary, so to speak, that can connect that which is higher to that which is lower. Similarly, in the Neshama, in the soul, there is a Makif. There are the internal aspects. First of all, there's the Pnimi, the internal aspects of the soul, which is known as Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, those three levels, right? Corresponding, I guess, to Maise, Dibur, and Machshava, different ways it's explained in different places, explained in different nuances, right? But it's generally a reference to the internal aspects of the soul. Then there is the Chaye Yechida, the transcendent aspects of the soul, which are related to which are transcendent. But one is a Makif, a transcendent aspect that's related to the Pnimi, and one is a Makif, which is completely beyond the Pnimi. Chaya being related more to the Pnimi, to the internal aspects that follow, the Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh, whereas the Yechida is completely beyond, it's, so to speak, Makif la Makif. It's one stage and it's completely removed from the internal aspects of the soul. So now, having said all that, let's see how the Rebbe articulates this level of Ru'usa Deliba, the desire of the heart. V'chein ugam b'avayda Ru'usa Deliba, page Kufay and Ches, 2 lines from the bottom, V'chein. So too it is also in serving Hashem at the level of Ru'usa Deliba, the desire of the heart. The Afshe Ru'usa Deliba hu mitzad makifim, although Ru'usa Deliba, the desire of the heart, results from the makifim, the transcendent aspects of the soul, as just explained. Mikol Mokaim, nonetheless, Gambe Makifim Yeshvez Madreges, also the transcendent aspects of the soul. There are two levels. Makif Hashayach El Apnimi, El Kelim, the transcendent aspect that has a connection and is associated to the vessels, right? Kelim denoting something Pnimi, something internal. It contains something in it. Elishu Makif Aleim, it's just that it is associated with the Kelim, with the vessels. But its association is in the transcendent way. It's beyond it. But then there is a makif, a transcendent level, which is totally beyond the kelim, totally beyond the vessels. Right? For example, when we say Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem's name Yud Kei Vav Kei, there are two interpretations to Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei, known in Chassidus as Havaya, could be Havaya Meloshen Mehava. It's from the expression of creator. And then there is Havaya Meloshen Hoyo Hive V'yi Ke'echad, Hashem, where he is past, present, and future all together. In other words, beyond time. Creation is defined by something that is limited in time and space. That which is beyond creation is beyond time and space. When you say Havayim Eloshon Mahava, we're talking about a level of godliness that's related to creation. When we say Havayim Eloshon Hoya Heve V'Yihiyeh, we're talking about a level of godliness where past, present, and future is all in one. So that's tremendous. It means it's beyond time. But the mere fact that you're saying that it's Hoya Heve V'Yihiyeh Ke'echad, that it's past, present, and future all in one, it means it's beyond, but has some association to it. There is then a level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is known as Shem HaEtzem. It's a name that defines Hashem's very essence, where it has no association, not to Mehave, not to Hoya Heve V'Yihiyeh Ke'echad, that's completely beyond. Similarly here, we say, Makif HaShayach Elekelim would be something like, it's beyond. Like you say, Hoya Heve V'Yihiyeh, and the names of Hashem would mean past, present, and future all in one. But the mere fact that you express its greatness, that it's beyond time, means it's got that time plays some role there, albeit in a detached way, in a negative way, in a disassociated way. It's beyond it, in a shlilul way, right? When you say that it's completely beyond, you can't say, it's like saying that a genius is so clever that he is infinitely more times clever than an ant. That's Maila, that expression, that's not a compliment. There's no connection. That doesn't express the greatness of that genius. So when you talk about a makif, which is the Maila Mina Kelim in the Gamri, it means that it's completely disassociated from Kelim, from anything internal. So so too in this level of love of Hashem known as the desire of the heart. So again, there are two modes of two modes of this level of Usud Liba. Where do we see this? One level is Shukim Moshel Shnei Oyhavim, like two people that love each other. She'ahavosam Chazaka B'Yisroel, who have very, very strong love, which is L'mayla Metam Vadas, completely beyond rationality. And it's Ve'ahava She'enot Tluya B'Davar, it's a love which is not dependent on anything. It's an essential love. It's not because of anything that anybody recognizes in the other individual, or anything that the other individual does for the other one, that they love each other. In which case, if that which causes them to love each other would end or dissipate, or something else would interfere, the love could fall apart. If it's a love that's not dependent on anything, what could possibly interfere? But there is a level of love of this kind. However, it is a level of love which is only related to the revealed levels, and it's possible that it should become concealed. In other words, it's a level of love which indeed is not dependent on anything, right? But it's a love which expresses itself in a revealed way, but it has the possibility to become concealed. It could become latent. How does that relate to the Usud Liba? Let's first say the words inside, then we can expand on that. So too in this level of Avas Hashem known as Usud Liba, Shehi Rak B'Madrigas Agili. There is a level of Usud Liba which relates only to the revealed aspects. Even though the level of Usud Liba is beyond rationality, Mikol Mokemarei Hu Rak B'Madrigas Agili, nonetheless it's in relation to the revealed level, the Efshishat is Alam, it's possible for this Ru'usa Liba to become concealed. How does it become revealed? How do we awaken this level of Ru'usa Liba to become revealed from its state of concealment? Through his bonus, through contemplation. When something needs to trigger the love to become revealed. As in the parable of the two people that love each other, mentioned before, when their love for each other is concealed, then how is it awakened? We need to remind them that they love each other. So in other words, the love is not dependent on anything. However, there is something that can trigger the love to become revealed. And by definition, that love could become concealed. So it's there, but it could be in a state of latency, it could be latent, and it needs a trigger to make it become revealed. So although the love is indeed not dependent on anything, but whether it's concealed or revealed does depend on something. Something can trigger it. The Av Zuhi B'Hagbala. this love is still limited. Why? Because it's dependent on something that could awaken it. For although after it's awakened, the love is not dependent on that which caused it, which triggered you to trigger the person to remind himself of the ahava. Mikol makim, nonetheless, ha gufa, the mere fact that in order for the love to become revealed, it's dependent on something that awakens it, that triggers, that reminds him of that. Vayihiyu. So that fact alone is enough to make it limited in some way. This is because generally this love is related to a level which could have something that conceals over it. So in other words, in the makif hashayich halakelim, in the transcendent aspect, even though it's transcendent, but because it's associated to that which is lower than it, it has a connection to that which is lower than it, and in terminology of Chassidus and Kabbalah, that level has an opposing force. So you have that level in Kedusha, and you have that level in Klippa. This level, even though it's transcendent, it's a very high level of Kedusha, of godliness, or in the soul, it's a high level of the soul, there is a force that in the opposite side that corresponds to it and could conceal it. So even though it remains intact, in other words, it remains in its connection to Hashem, always, but it could be concealed. And it sometimes needs something to trigger it, to remind it that of its Avas Hashem. So that is still at a level of Hagbala, of limit. In the next section, the Rebbe is going to discuss the level of Re'usu Deliba at the much higher level. So over here we're talking about, I guess if we want to use the levels of the soul, we're talking about the Ava, Re'usu Deliba, as it relates to the Chaya level of the soul. And in the next section, on the higher level of the soul, there is the possibility for some force to oppose it. So therefore it's Bahagbala, there's a measure of limit. In the next section, the Rebbe is going to talk about a higher level of Re'usu Deliba, to which there is no possibility for concealment, and that's completely beyond Medida Bahagbala, that's completely beyond measure and limit. More about that, Mitzvah Shem, on Thursday.